Concept getters, how are you guys? Welcome back to another one, which is part B of the previous video. This one is going to focus on compound interest and inflation, right? So as I was saying in part A, I was first of all, obviously, I started with describing what each variable on the formula I modify, right? So I'm going to continue with this one. As I was saying again in simple interest video, I said A represents the future value, which is the amount of money you're going to get in the future after having invested, or the amount of money you're going to fully pay in the future after having taken out the loan, right? And then your P here, you can look here, guys. Your P is your original value, the amount of money that you are investing right now, or the amount of money that you are taking out as a loan right now. Now we have basically just one. We have one new variable. When you compare this with simple interest, we have one new variable here for compound interest, which is your M. When you look at this formula here, you can see that there's an M under I, and then there's an M next to N. The M is divided, the M is a denominator of I in a fraction of I over M, meaning our I, which is our interest rate, will be divided by M when it comes to compound interest. And the same M that you divided I by, you're going to multiply it by N for nostalgic, N on the exponent there. So the difference between simple interest and compound interest is that with simple interest, we only have IN, right, in your brackets. There's no exponent. But with compound interest, the N for nostalgic, for number of years, will be outside the bracket, and it's going to be an exponent. And it will multiply by M. What is that M? You can see here, I described it. The M for Mpho is for compounding period in a year. So sometimes M will be 4 if they said compounded quarterly. Sometimes M will be 2 if they said compounded semi-annually, meaning in semesters. We only have 2 semesters in a year, right? And sometimes M, like this specific question that we're going to deal with right now, M will be 12 because they said compounded monthly. Why? Compounding period in a year means how many months do we have in a year? We have 12. So if they compound every month, which is monthly, then we need to divide our I with 12 and multiply the number of years by 12. Does it make sense? And then another formula here, we have the capital letter I, which is our interest. It's not our interest rate, it is our interest. Meaning if I invested 5,000 Rand and then after 5 years I get 10,000 Rand, my interest is 5,000 Rand because I added 5,000 Rand into my initial 5,000 Rand. So interest is the amount of money. It's not just a percentage. It is the money, right? Our A is still our future value. P is still our original value, right? So to get interest, you just take the future value, you subtract the original value. And then now the small letter I is our interest rate, right? So an R is the one that you see on the question. When they say 10% per annum, that 10 is our R. So you're going to substitute 10 onto R and you say R over 100, basically 10 over 100, then you get your I. So every time before you write your I, always go like the number that I have on my question, I'm going to divide it by 100, and the answer will be substituted on I all the time. Clear? So let's do this question, guys, before I talk a blue streak. Let's say Konkodi invested 100,000 Rand into a bank account for 5 years. That offered him an interest rate of 10% per annum compounded monthly. Now, how much in total will Konkodi receive from the investment after 5 years? Total A, right? So which means we're going to use this formula. We're going to be like A is equal to P into 1 plus I over M all to the exponent N times A. So what's going to be our P? Our P is our original amount of money, which is 100,000 Rand, into 1 plus. Our I is, it's going to be our 10. Remember, we're going to say I equals to R over 100, right? What's our R? 10 over 100. So the answer will just be 0,1. So our I is 0,1. So I'm substituting I as 0,1 over our M. they said compounded monthly, right? Which means I'm going to say my M will just be 12. So I'll say over 12 to the exponent. Our N is number of years. So it's going to be 5 times M back to 12. Clear? Then you punch in your calculator, you're going to get 164,530,89, basically 89 cents. And that's going to be your answer. That's literally the amount of money you're going to get after 5 years, guys. This is easy, right? That's how you use compound interest all the time. You just substitute what you got, right? Now, B is an interesting one as well. They say, how much interest will Konkodi get from his investment? Now, interest, remember, it's not interest rate. Interest rate is a percentage, but interest is money. Clear? So interest is this formula here, right? We're just going to be like, oh, I is equals to the original, the future value minus the original. What's the future value? 164, because we calculated it. 530,89 minus 100,000, right? And then what's going to be the money? It's just going to be 64,530 rand 89 cent. And that's going to be our answer. So basically, this person got 64,530 rand 89 cents as his interest. He invested 100,000 rand and got 64,530 rand 89 cents as interest on top of the money that he invested. And in total, in his bank account, he has 164,530 rand 89 cents. Does it make sense? That's easy, guys. Like, this is very easy, right? Now, this is an interesting part. Now, let's go to the interesting part. They say, if after 5 years, Konkodi wants to buy a car that currently costs 120,000 rand with the money he will receive from his investment. Listen, he invests money now, and in the future he's going to have 164,530. That money that he receives from the investment is 164,530. This person wants to buy a car, right, in the future with the future value. But the current cost of the car is 120,000 rand. If the current cost right now is 120, in 5 years' time, the cost of the car won't be the same. It will inflate, it will increase. Do that make sense? That's why they said, will he afford the car if inflation rate is 5.3% per annum? Now check, with inflation rate, guys, inflation rate, when it comes to inflation, every item in a shop increases its price using an inflation rate. So every year, there will always be an increment on prices, right? So this rate is the rate at which you calculate how much something is going to cost in the future. That's inflation. If a loaf of bread is 10 rand this year, it might be 15 bucks 3 years from now. And how did we get that 15 rand? We're going to use inflation rate. But then with inflation rate, which one is the formula for inflation rate? The compound interest formula is the one for inflation rate. Remember, I said, guys, when we were dealing with simple interest, I said higher purchase is always using simple interest. Now get this now. Inflation rate always uses compound interest formula. Clear? So we're just going to go straight to saying, well, let's first calculate how much this car will cost in 5 years' time, right? If it is 120,000 rand right now, how much will it cost in 5 years to come? We're going to grow this money using this rate. Clear? So we're going to say our A is equals to P into 1 plus I over M all to the exponent n times M. But now, mind you, our M will always be 1 for inflation, meaning the compound is not compounded monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and what so not, right? It will always be compounded annually. Annually means yearly, every year. Inflation always will be compounded annually. So M will always be 1, right? Always for inflation rate. So this is for always. Clear? So I'm going to be like, oh, my M is already 1. So what I need now, I need my P and my I. My P is the current cost, and then my I will be the inflation rate. Clear. So I'll just say P is 120,000 rand into 1 plus. Then it's going to be 0,053. How did I get that? I said I is equals to R over 100. Remember? And then what's our R? 5,3 over 100. You punch it on your calculator, you're going to get what? 0,053. Then this is our I. Then we substitute it on I. Then we say over. What's our value of M? 1. Close bracket. How many years? This person is planning to buy this car in 5 years' time, meaning it's going to take 5 years calculating from the current cost to get the future cost, right? So basically our N is 5 multiplied by M will just be 1. Then you get your answer. Your answer will be, let's see, okay, it's going to be 155,354 rand 24 cents. This is how much the car will cost in the future. Now let's first check the question. If after 5 years Konkodi wants to buy a car that currently costs 120,000 rand with the money he will receive from his investment, will he afford the car? That's the question. Will he afford the car if inflation is 5.3? Now, using inflation, we already know how much the car will cost. The car will cost 155. It will increase from 120 to 155. That's price increment using inflation rate, right? So now that we know how much the car will cost in the future, which is 5 years from now, which is basically 155,000 rand, 354 rand, and 24 cents. Okay, right? Now that we know the price of the car, how do we determine if the person will basically afford the car? We check how much the person has or will have in 5 years' time. In 5 years' time, check this blue tick. In 5 years' time, we had already established that the person will have 164,530 rand 89 cents in his bank account. And again, we established that the car will cost 155. So we can see that 164 is bigger than 155, meaning Konkodi has more money in his bank account than the cost of the car in the future. In the future, Konkodi will have 164,000. The car in the future will cost 155, meaning Konkodi can afford the car with the money that is going to get from the investment. Does it make sense? Clear, right? So, right, like when we look at right now, Konkodi has only 100,000, but the car was 120. He couldn't afford it now, like he wouldn't afford it now, but in the future, after having invested, he could afford the future cost of the car because his investment would have yielded interest. Does it make sense? So now we can say, oh, because our future value from investment for Konkodi is greater than the future cost of the car, then yes. So we're gonna say, conclude and say yes, he will afford. So you have to conclude, right, guys? After calculating, you have to be like, oh, let me analyze the prices and understand what the question wants from me and be like, yes. Sometimes the question won't ask if someone will afford whatever. They'll just say calculate the future value. Just, give them the future value and that's it. But if they ask about affordability, always conclude about the affordability after having shown your calculations. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Compound interest, the basic concept of compound interest, and basic concept of inflation. And that is just it. Otherwise, remember, guys, to do what? To subs, right? And share with others so that they can also understand. And then remember to comment with more concept that you would like me to post and right? And then otherwise, happy 2024, happy 2025, happy every year. Yippee!